here to do the devil's work.
As part of this month of horror, I am going through all of the decades, starting from the 1970s, going up until modern times, and giving you guys a list of what I think are my 10 favorite horror movies of each and every decade. We already did the 1970s, now we're moving into the 1980s, and dear God, like, you know, I could see you making an argument saying that the 1970s has the best, like, individual horror movies, you know, with Alien, The Exorcist, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, all of those. But when you look at the sheer quantity of amazing horror films of the 1980s, it just seems endless. Like, I was destroying my brain trying to come up with this list. And once again, this is not meant to be an objective list. This is not me saying these are definitively the top 10 best horror movies of the decade. These are just my personal opinions and personal preferences. So put your list down below. Put your top 10, your top 20, whatever it is. But I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I had to continuously revamp my list over and over, think about what I would prefer to watch over this or that. And like, even in my top 10, like, I don't have any Friday the 13th movies in my top 10, but Friday the 13th was such a huge part of the 1980s. It's insane. I would pick part 4 and part 6 as the best, by the way, and part 2. I also don't have any Child's Play movies on my list. And after doing the Child's Play retrospective last year, like, you know, I've always liked the Child's Play franchise, but after revisiting it and getting into those movies again, I love Chucky so much. Like, it hurts to not have Chucky on my top 10. So obviously, you know, any of those that came out in the 80s, I would highly recommend. But the list doesn't stop there. There's so many more that I wish I could put in my top 10. You have Day of the Dead, The Fog, They Live, Videodrome, Poltergeist, From Beyond, People Under the Stairs, Fright Night. You got hidden gems like Basket Case. You could say The Lost Boys, Prince of Darkness, Christine, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Like, there's just no end to the amount of great horror films that came out in the 1980s. But all right, all of that aside, all of those are my honorable mentions. I love all of those movies. But let's get down to it, man. All right, so this is what I'm going to consider my top 10. And by the way, I'm going to warn you ahead of time, my number 1 is cheating, okay? I'm cheating with my number 1, but we'll get there when we get there. All right, so let's definitively start this. Let's start at number 10. Okay, I have a confession to make. I fucked up, like, real bad. I could have sworn that the movie Dead Alive by Peter Jackson came out in the 80s, but I was completely wrong. I double checked and it came out in 1992. I don't know why I was so confident about it coming out in the 80s. I guess it just feels like an 80s movie to me. So originally when I made the list, I put Dead Alive at my number 6, but now I can't have that in there because it's technically a 90s movie, so it'll show up in the 90s review. So instead, everything's going to get moved up one. So my number 10 is going to be actually my number 9. So for numbers 10 through 7 on this list, just move it all up one. So 7 becomes 6, 8 becomes 7, you know, and so on and so forth. So I have to come up with an actual number 10 now. So my real number 10 is going to be Day of the Dead by George Romero. This movie stays true to form with Romero's first 3 films of creating the best zombie movie of that entire decade. I would say that I think Day of the Dead has the best special effects of all of them. And you could actually probably argue that Day of the Dead might have the best special effects of the 1980s just in general. I really love Captain Rhodes as the antagonist. I think he's the best antagonist in any of the George Romero films. And I actually really like the direction that he was going with the character of Bub, kind of giving zombies this little bit of intelligence, because you already kind of set up that they kind of mimic things that they did when they were human. And even going back to the mall setting in Dawn of the Dead, it was just kind of the natural instinct of what they would have done when they were alive. So keep them dead, keep them in that zombie form long enough. Well, we might get to the point where they start to recognize how to use things like weapons or even guns. So I thought that was a really creative idea, but it doesn't get too overblown. It's just in there enough to make the story work for me. So yeah, Day of the Dead is going to be my actual number 10. So the rest are going to be incorrect up until we get to number 5. So I'm sorry about that, guys. And this is going to be a movie I watched for the first time, actually, I think maybe not last year, maybe the year before. And it was a suggestion from you guys, from my subscribers, of a movie that for some reason I had never heard of before, but after watching it, I can see why it was such a cult hit. And it's a movie that I've continued to think about ever since I saw it. So I think that to me is one of the testaments of a great film, in my opinion, or at least something that you would consider a favorite. Is it's not just like you appreciate it in the moment, it's that it haunts you for weeks or months after you see it. It's Possession. It's a movie called Possession. And this is a film that I also put on my top 10 horror movies that have never had a sequel or remake. It's a complete standalone, and I feel like the less said about this movie, the better, in terms of going into it for the first time, just like I went into this movie completely blind. But what I will say is that it goes in several directions that you would never expect. It's not a possession movie in the sense of, like, it's not like The Exorcist. It's not like somebody getting possessed by the devil or a demon or something like that. It's actually very much a drama between these two characters that break up. The girl breaks up with the protagonist, and he's not sure why, and he's trying to figure it out, and they have a lot of, kind of back and forths and arguments with one another, and it gets, pretty realistic in that sense. But then he sees what she's truly been up to during all of this time, and it gets dark. Like, I don't want to spoil the movie for you guys if you haven't seen it, but there's an extended sequence of this girl kind of going through these corridors and going through this parking garage, and something extremely traumatic is happening to her, and it's all done in one shot, and it just keeps going and going, and it gets so, like, intense and ridiculous to the point where, like, you're waiting for the camera to cut at any moment, but it doesn't. It just stays on her the entire time. And it's something that you'll never forget once you see it. Also, the ending, it brings a lot up to talk about and to question as to what was actually going on the entire time. And also Sam Neill, kind of a low-key Scream King. I remember being a little kid, obviously, I loved Jurassic Park, and I always loved Sam Neill in that movie, but that's what I always knew him from as a kid. And then as I got older, I realized he was in all these horror movies. Like, he's in this movie, Possession, In the Mouth of Madness, Event Horizon. It's like, man, he's kind of a low-key Scream King in his own way. My number 9 pick is going to be a movie called Re-Animator. This one is semi-well-known, I would say. I'd say, like, all these movies are probably pretty well-known by people that are into horror movies. Re-Animator is one of those films, though, that I feel like a lot of just kind of casual moviegoers haven't seen, or at least, when I try to introduce it to my friends or something, it's usually one of those movies that I happily get to show them for the first time that they haven't seen. There is a sort of mad scientist type character that creates a serum that, if you see the movie, and if you saw the new movie, The Substance, that just came out, you'll see an eerie similarity there, although they do very different things. Here, he is sort of reanimating the dead. And so this is a sort of zombie movie, but I would consider it more in the vein of, like, Evil Dead. But it's a little bit of everything. You got the mad scientist stuff in there, you got the reanimated corpses stuff, you have really great special effects, practical effects at the time. It gets as over the top and as gory as you want it to be, and it's just a fun ride from start to finish. I wouldn't say that the movie is particularly scary, and I think a lot of my top 10 here in the 1980s are movies that I tend to have a little bit more fun with, as opposed of just being, very bleak and dark and constantly scary and depressing the whole way through. Many movies on this list, Re-Animator included, is a little bit more of like a wacky, kind of ridiculous sort of time, but in the best way that you can imagine. Because the next movie goes even further with that, and my number 8 pick is Return of the Living Dead. This movie is so goddamn ridiculous that I just can't help but love it every time I watch it. My favorite thing about this movie is the two characters that are working in the medical supply office. When they try to figure out what to do with these zombies, I just love how they continuously flip out nonstop.
Oh! Oh, Jesus, Jesus! Your tongue, boy, if you like this job! Like this job? Think! We gotta kill the cops!
They're just like, what do we do? I don't know. Do we shoot him in the head? It worked in the movie. You mean the movie lied? It's just like, it's just so ridiculous. And I just can't, every time I watch it, I just laugh my ass off. But it also comes up with a really unique approach to its zombies. And oddly enough, a lot of zombie parodies are actually parodying Return of the Living Dead as opposed to Night of the Living Dead. It's not a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead is known as a movie in this universe, and that's kind of their jumping off point of like, that's how we thought zombies were supposed to act, but in this movie they act differently. Whereas in this one, a headshot doesn't necessarily kill them, and if you cut off their limbs, like if you cut off their arm will move independently of their body, so their arm can still attack you. So it's just like almost impossible to stop these zombies. They also spread through this chemical. The chemical gets in the air. The dead start rising up from the cemetery. These zombies are literally like a plague upon the earth that cannot be stopped. And that, raises the tension, and also the just watching the characters try to figure out how they're supposed to fight against these zombies is a lot of fun. And it's got that classic 80s music in it too. So great stuff. My number 7 pick is going to be An American Werewolf in London. This is another one of those movies that I feel like I have to watch every single October, or else it doesn't feel like the Halloween season. This is an odd comfort movie for me. I know that probably makes no sense considering all the body horror stuff that's happening during that iconic transformation scene, but there's something about this movie that kind of puts me in a really good mood. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the music in the movie, the choices, or maybe it's just the charisma of some of the actors. Like, I love the main character's best friend that gets killed first and continuously comes back as a ghost. I love that scene where they're in the movie theater at the end and he's trying to think about like, okay, so in order to stop the curse, I have to die. And they start, it's just such a morbid, like dark humor moment where they start talking about all the methods of him to kill himself. And then the one lady's just like, oh, just grab a gun, put it in your mouth and pull the trigger. Like there's something about that makes me laugh. I don't know. I should probably go see a therapist. All of the werewolf scenes in this movie are very limited. You don't get as much werewolf action as you think that you would from like just knowing about the movie's reputation and just the fact that people, regard it as one of the best werewolf movies. But I think that the subtlety of how it uses its werewolf actually works really, really well. You don't get a good look at it until the very end. And it's also much more wolf-like than it is human-like. Like, they really took it back to just being a gigantic wolf instead of, the wolf man archetype that had been built up for so many years. Definitely is one of the best werewolf movies, and I think stands the test of time for many, many different reasons. All right, we're going to try to get a little bit more serious now. We're going to try to get our film bro credit because it's impossible to not have this on the list. I'm sorry, but number 5 is The Shining. The Shining, of course, you could argue is not just one of the best horror films ever made, but one of the best movies ever made in general. There's just nothing else like it. Stanley Kubrick, obviously, one of my favorite filmmakers, and I'm sure is the same for many, many other people out there. You can always talk about what his best movie is. I'm not saying I think The Shining is his best. It's probably 2001, but The Shining is just something else, man. It's an exhausting experience. It's something that I feel like everybody has to go through at one point in their life, just seeing Jack's deterioration within this complete, isolation of not just their location of being at the hotel, but also inside of his own mind. Kind of struggling to take care of this hotel and write this story while also wondering, is this hotel haunted? Is it not haunted? What is going on with it? And all of the iconic sequences of, the twins in the hallway, or the blood flying out of the elevator, or, Jack knocking down the door with the axe, or the hedge maze. It's just endless. Every single sequence in this movie is something that you remember for decades upon decades. Like, there's no moment in this film that doesn't feel like you're watching masters at their craft the entire way through. Between Shelley Duvall and her performance of terror, and obviously Jack Nicholson, doing his thing. It's just an incredible film from start to finish. And when people say it's one of the best horror films, I don't feel like you can really argue about it. I mean, obviously there's always going to be outliers. There's some people out there that don't like it, but I'm not one of them. So it's my number 5. At my number 4 is going to be John Carpenter's The Thing. I love movies where characters are trapped in one location and they just can't escape for whatever reason. In this case, they are in the middle of the Arctic and they discover an alien species. But not just that, the species can take on the form and the attributes of anything that it devours. And that includes people, which means that anybody at any time could be the Thing in disguise. It's a movie that gets better every single time I watch it, on top of the practical effects that are arguably the best of the 1980s. you also get this never-ending sense of dread and paranoia that seeps through every single scene. The first time you watch it, you're always trying to figure out who the thing is. I think it has, maybe tied with the original Friday the 13th, the best jump scare in any movie ever with the blood test sequence. I know it's coming, but I jump every single time that I watch it. Kurt Russell's performance is phenomenal, and of course it has that cliffhanger ending where you're wondering which of the characters is the thing. If not either of them, both of them, you don't know, and it just kind of leaves you with this uncomfortable feeling that lasts through the entire film, but particularly with the final scene also. It is one of the greats, man. It is one of the greats. It is John Carpenter on the top of his game, and definitely one of those movies that I've always loved, but it's every time I watch it, I love it even more. And number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original. This year is actually going to be the 40th anniversary of Nightmare on Elm Street, which is just crazy to think about. It is one of those franchises that I love all the way through. I don't really like part 5 and part 6, but even then you have Robert Englund's performance, and that's good enough for me. But I think that sometimes because of how silly and ridiculous and funny Freddy Krueger got over the years, sometimes people forget just how terrifying he is in the original. He has very limited screen time. He's mostly covered in shadow the entire film. He's not too jokey. Like there's moments of dark humor that I love, like when he's wrestling with Tina and she like rips off the skin in his face and there's just that skeleton that's just laughing maniacally. You could say that that's dark humor, and you're certainly right, but it's humor in a different way than the rest of the Elm Street series when the first movie is absolutely terrifying, dealing with this concept of falling asleep and there's a mass murderer that kills you in your dreams, and if you die in your dream, you die in real life, making people paranoid to go to sleep ever since. Freddy is such a unique antagonist to begin with, just having like the razor gloves, his backstory, the burned skin, the strange sweater, the fedora, based on so many different things. Wes Craven based it on a man that scared the shit out of him when he was younger, as well as stories of people that were believing that they were going to fall asleep and die and then actually did end up dying. So, you take all these sort of like scary things from reality and kind of blend them into this, dark, macabre character of Freddy Krueger that enjoys the sadistic glee that he gets from tormenting his victims. He is on a revenge mission, but he's having fun with it, and that's so scary about it too, is that he has this personality. He enjoys what he's doing. It's not just a mindless killer, going on instinct or just because they're evil. Like Freddy is evil, but he's having fun while he's doing this, and I think that Tina's death in Nightmare on Elm Street is the scariest death. It might be my favorite death scene in any movie. It's the girl that has the nightmare where she's kind of flown up on the ceiling and she's getting dragged across the ceiling with the blood trail behind her. And also I feel so bad for her boyfriend that's there too, because imagine just seeing that happening and just like, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like she's flying in the air, getting dragged across the ceiling, screaming her guts out, blood's flying everywhere. It is such a terrifying sequence to me that to me personally, like there's no other horror movie death that is as scary as that scene is portrayed. Nightmare on Elm Street, forever iconic. And for my number 2 pick, I'm going to go with Hellraiser, the original. I love Hellraiser so much, but only the original. I don't like the sequels. I don't even think part 2 is that good. People are like, Hellraiser 2 is great. I'm like, it's okay. Like it's the best sequel of the Hellraiser sequels, but that's not saying much. But the original gives me this feeling that none of the other sequels and almost no other horror movie has ever really given me. And it's very hard for me to describe why I love this movie so much, but I think it's that idea of the fear of the unknown, that this puzzle box can awaken this other dimension where these creatures just take you, abduct you, torture you, give you the height of pain and pleasure, whatever it is. But you know, they exist in another realm. They exist beyond human understanding. And I love that they're not the focal point of the movie. If you come into Hellraiser nowadays, after, you know, it's been so famous for so many years and you've seen so many images of Pinhead, you might think that Pinhead and the Cenobites are like a Freddy Krueger or like a Jason, but it's not a slasher series. It's completely different than that. They have barely any screen time, but that's kind of what I love about it. It's kind of why I love the God Hand of Berserk is because you know that because they have such limited screen time, that when they do show up, shit is gonna get real, and it makes it 10 times scarier. I love thinking about what their backstory is. That's why I don't really like the sequels so much, because they explain who the Cenobites were when they were human. I prefer the mystery. I prefer just thinking like, this person was probably a human once, but they've spent hundreds or thousands of years in this other dimension and they just become a completely different entity. But beyond the lore of the Cenobites, I also love Frank as a villain, because Frank is the actual antagonist of the movie. He is the guy that is just a complete dickhead, just a complete asshole. He's the kind of character that you love to hate. He's the kind of character that you want to see die. You know, he completely disregarded his brother. He had sex with Julia, his brother's fiance. Julia's a piece of shit too, but like, they're both like horrible people. But Frank is on this other level entirely. He, you know, searched the world to find the darkest secrets of the earth, and he stumbles upon the puzzle box, you know. And then when he gets resurrected, I like how he has to kind of build his flesh up again. He starts out as this skeleton thing with this amazing practical effects sequence of his resurrection. And Kirsty as well as the main character. I think she's a criminally underrated final girl, just funny, smart, proactive, but also completely terrified the entire time. Yeah, I love the music of this movie too. The score, this like orchestral sort of like church, you know, this like Church of Satan sort of feeling that it gives you. Man, I just think the original Hellraiser is incredible. You know, it's definitely dated, you know, with some of the special effects, and I won't deny that. But that also, to me, gives it a little bit of its charm. And also adds to why I like it so much. I you know, it's just it's a product of its time, but in the best way possible. And my number one of the 1980s, if you know me, you know what it is. It's The Evil Dead. But I'm gonna cheat here as well, and I'm gonna put Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, because if I was truly being honest, Evil Dead 2 would have been like my number 6 or number 7, and I would have had to take possession off the list, and I didn't want to do that. So technically cheating a little bit, I'm putting Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2, but particularly the original Evil Dead is my favorite horror film of all time. I love it so much. I love the low-budget nature of it. That part of what makes me love it so much is the behind the scenes filmmaking aspect of it, that it was, you know, a bunch of people that went out into the woods to this real cabin and just tried to make the scariest movie they could. You know, they didn't have the backing of Hollywood. They didn't have a tremendous budget. They didn't have legitimate actors. Like, all the actors are basically just Sam Raimi's friends, you know, and there's something very I guess charming about that. There's something very special about that I love, that just makes it feel possible to make a movie. But on top of that, like the film itself, I do just genuinely enjoy. I love Sam Raimi's camera work. I love what he does as a director and the way that he tells his stories. Bruce Campbell as Ash is just iconic, a character that I love to see grow and develop over time. The Ash that we meet in the original Evil Dead is very different than the Ash that eventually winds up in Army of Darkness or the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV show, but I love seeing the progression of him going through all this shit and then like getting more and more tired of the bullshit, but also just being completely incompetent in almost every conceivable way. The special effects are great for what they were able to do. It does not stop with the carnage. It does not stop with the gore. And if you think about it from like the perspective of really being into the story, you got to think that like these are just a group of friends, and all of a sudden you're put into a situation where you have absolutely no choice but to chop your friends up. Bodily dismemberment is the only way to stop them from being possessed. You know, there's no The Exorcist priest here to like exorcise the demon. You know, there's no way to escape because you can't run through the wilderness or you're going to get raped by trees. You know, there's just nothing you can do. And it's like you're just forced to kind of, and I like that aspect of it too. Like Ash is obviously the most like like Scotty is way more competent than Ash is for the first half of the movie, and I think Scotty's a badass too. I think Scotty's underrated. Scotty was awesome, but Ash is kind of forced to be the hero. He's forced to be the main character. He was never somebody that wanted that burden. He was never somebody that was good at that burden. And even once he finally is in the main hero perspective, sure, he eventually puts a chainsaw on his hand and grabs a shotgun and stuff, but like he struggles, he loses fights, he is constantly getting his ass kicked. He's just a regular dude. And that's kind of what I love about Evil Dead also, is because Ash very much is just kind of the everyman. Like if he had it up to him, he would just go down to Florida and chill. Like he's just like not about this. He's like, I am constantly in this situation where I have to fucking fight demons and stuff, but this is never what I wanted. All my friends always die. My girlfriends always die. And it's just like he copes with it by sort of just ignoring it, you know, like putting his face in the sand until he's forced to confront it. And there's something I find really funny about that. He's, I guess, what you would call the reluctant hero, you know, sort of like a Mad Max, or like, you know, if you go into his incompetency, he's a little bit like Jack Burton, you know, from Big Trouble in Little China, where it's like, he really shouldn't be here. He's not the right guy for the job, but at the same time, he is the right guy for the job. And also all of the variety that Evil Dead can give you. You know, you're dealing with the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, so we can have people get possessed. We can have them mutate into strange demonic Henriettas. You know, the Evil Dead TV show goes even further with all of this. I know we're talking about the 80s, but just as a franchise in general, there's so many different directions that you can go with the Necronomicon and the Book of the Dead and what you can call forth from it and everything. All the cliffhangers of the Evil Dead movies, you know, transported back to medieval times. And it's just such a fun ride. I think all the Evil Dead movies are good. Even the remakes without Ash are good horror movies. You know, I always want Ash in my Evil Dead, but even the remakes are good horror movies. And it all came from that original, you know, Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell collaboration of trying to make their dreams come true and trying to make a movie for the first time. When I was 15 years old, I explained this in the Evil Dead retrospective video, but I made my first horror movie with my friends. I called it Possessed, and it was basically an Evil Dead ripoff, all taking place in my parents' basement. But if it wasn't for Evil Dead, I wouldn't have even been inspired to do that. And still to this day, I have a passion of wanting to make movies, and Evil Dead is, you know, definitely one of the catalysts for that. So that is my list. There are so many other 1980s horror movies that I wanted to try to include. It's very, very hard to get it down to just 10, but that's going to be my 10 for now. Maybe next year I'll change my mind, but tell me what you guys think. And also down below, put your top 10 or your top 20 or whatever you want to. And let me know what you think about my list. Share your list. Thanks for watching this video. As always, guys, give it a thumbs up and a comment. Share it if you want to. And if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have channel memberships and Patreon. Even $1 a month is incredibly helpful. And also all the social media links where you can follow me down below as well. So thanks for watching, guys. And I'll talk to you later.